Right, let's get one thing straight. The story of Škoda isn't one of those glamorous tales. You hear about Enzo Ferrari sketching supercars on a napkin in some sun-drenched Italian cafe. No, this story starts in a much more Czech way. It begins in 1895, in a town called Mladá Boleslav, which honestly sounds like something you'd name a particularly stubborn farm animal. And it all kicked off because a man named Václav Klement, who was a bookseller of all things, got thoroughly cheesed off with his German-made bicycle. It had broken, you see, and when he wrote to the manufacturer to complain, they sent back a snotty reply in German, basically telling him to get lost. This, it turns out, was a very, very big mistake. Now Klement, being a patriotic Czech and not one to take this sort of Teutonic arrogance lying down, decided he could do better. This mate was Václav Laurin, a proper mechanic who actually knew how to put bits of metal together to make them do something useful. Together, these two Václavs, the brain and the spanners, formed a company. They called it Laurin and Klement. Their mission was simple: build a bicycle that wouldn't fall to pieces the first time it saw a pothole. They named their first creation the Slavia, a nod to Slavic pride, which was essentially a two-wheeled protest against shoddy German engineering. It was a brilliant piece of kit, sturdy and reliable. People loved it. Soon their little workshop in Mladá Boleslav was churning out bicycles as fast as they could build them. After conquering the world of bicycles, or at least the Czech-speaking part of it, our two heroes, Laurin and Klement, got a bit bored. Pedaling is all well and good, but it's hard work, isn't it? They looked at their Slavia bicycles and had a thought. A brilliant, world-changing thought that has occurred to every great inventor since the dawn of time. What this needs, they declared, is an engine. So, in 1899, they bolted a small single-cylinder engine onto one of their bicycle frames. The result was the motocyclette, a terrifying machine that was essentially a bicycle with a very loud and explosive surprise attached to it. It was noisy, probably unreliable, and almost certainly dangerous. Which meant, of course, that it was a massive hit. They were now in the motorcycle business, and they were astonishingly good at it. These weren't just crude machines for pottering down to the village pub. Laurin and Klement motorcycles started winning races. All over Europe, their bikes were leaving competitors in a cloud of two-stroke smoke. They were building a reputation for engineering excellence and, crucially, for speed. This racing success was the best marketing they could have asked for. It proved their little engines were tough and powerful. The company grew, the factory expanded, and the name Laurin and Klement became synonymous with cutting-edge, two-wheeled performance. They were the kings of the motorcycle world. But even this wasn't enough. The logical next step after putting an engine on two wheels is to see what happens when you add another two. The transition to cars began around 1905 with the voiturette A. Now, voiturette is a fancy French word for small car, but this was a proper motor car. By the 1920s, Laurin and Klement was a giant of Central European car manufacturing. They were building everything from luxurious limousines to rugged trucks and even aircraft engines. They were, to put it mildly, doing rather well for themselves. However, the world was changing. The post-war economy was tough and competition was fierce. Building cars was becoming an increasingly expensive and complicated business. To keep growing, they needed a partner, a big one. A partner with deep pockets, vast industrial might, and a name that commanded respect across the engineering world. That partner was Škoda Works. Now, this wasn't a car company. Škoda Works was an absolute colossus of heavy industry based in the city of Pilsen. If you wanted something massive and made of metal, you went to them. They built locomotives, power turbines, massive guns for battleships, and pretty much anything else that required a furnace the size of a cathedral. They were the industrial backbone of the newly formed Czechoslovakia. For them, car manufacturing was the next logical frontier, a way to diversify their portfolio and get a piece of the booming consumer market. It was a match made in industrial heaven. So, in 1925, the deal was done. The mighty Škoda Works acquired Laurin and Klement. The name that had been built on bicycles and racing victories was phased out, and from then on the cars rolling out of the Mladá Boleslav factory would wear a new badge, the famous winged arrow of Škoda. With the might of Škoda Works behind them, the 1930s became a golden age for the brand. This was when they really started to innovate, producing cars that were not just reliable, but genuinely clever. The crowning achievement of this era was the Škoda Popular, launched in 1934. It was a masterpiece of sensible engineering. Instead of a heavy, conventional ladder frame, it used a brilliant backbone chassis, basically a strong central tube with independent suspension all around. This made it lighter, stronger, and more comfortable to drive on the frankly terrible roads of the time. It was affordable, stylish, and an enormous success. The Popular wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of modern Czechoslovakian engineering. It came in all sorts of body styles, from little roadsters to practical saloons, and it put the nation on wheels. People took them on incredible journeys to prove their toughness, including a famous trip all the way to India. Following the Popular came other brilliant models like the Superb, a large, luxurious limousine that was every bit as elegant and well-engineered as the German or American luxury cars of the day. This period showed what Škoda was capable of when left to its own devices. They were at the forefront of automotive design, using advanced concepts that many other manufacturers wouldn't adopt for decades. Cars like the Škoda Rapid were sleek, streamlined, and fast. They had a distinct character and a flair for clever solutions that delivered real-world benefits to the driver. The brand had a clear identity, smart, robust, and offering excellent value. They were building cars that people were genuinely proud to own. Of course, this era of innovation and optimism was happening under the shadow of gathering storm clouds in Europe. But for a brief, shining moment, Škoda was one of the most exciting car makers on the continent. Just as Škoda was hitting its stride, building some of the best cars in its history, the world decided to have a massive argument. The outbreak of World War II and the preceding occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1939 changed everything, and not for the better. The country was absorbed into the Third Reich, and the brilliant car factory in Mladá Boleslav was immediately repurposed for the German war effort. Civilian car production ground to a halt. The days of designing elegant roadsters and clever family cars were over, replaced by the grim reality of military production. It was honestly a dark and difficult chapter in the company's history. The factory's output shifted dramatically. Instead of building the Škoda Superb, the production lines were now churning out military hardware. This included things like off-road trucks, gun tractors, and components for aircraft and other weapons. The skilled workforce that had been fine-tuning engines and crafting beautiful bodywork were now tasked with manufacturing the tools of war for their occupiers. It was a bitter pill to swallow for a company that had been a symbol of national pride. Being a significant industrial asset for the German war machine made the Mladá Boleslav factory a prime target for Allied bombers. In the final days of the war in May 1945, the plant was heavily bombed and a large part of it was destroyed. It was a devastating blow, leaving the factory in ruins just as the conflict was ending. The company had not only lost 6 years of development and its independence, but now faced the monumental task of rebuilding from the literal ashes. Just as Škoda was starting to pick itself up from the rubble of the war, another profound change swept across the country. In 1948, Czechoslovakia fell under communist rule, and the Iron Curtain slammed down across Europe. For Škoda, this meant being nationalized and completely cut off from its Western markets and technological developments. The company that had once competed with the best in Europe was now trapped, forced to operate within the rigid, inefficient, and chronically underfunded confines of a planned socialist economy. This was the beginning of a long, slow period of stagnation. The cars of this era really tell the story. Models like the Škoda 1101 and 1102 Tudor, which were essentially pre-war designs, were kept in production for far too long. While the West was experiencing a post-war automotive boom with new designs and technologies, Škoda had to make do with what it had. Later models, like the 440 Spartak and the first Octavia from 1959, were decent, robust cars, but they were already falling behind the curve. The real symbol of the communist era for Škoda was the rear-engine car. Starting with the 1000 MB in 1964 and continuing through the 105 and 120 series and right up to the favourite's predecessor, the Estelle, Škoda became one of the last bastions of this outdated layout in mainstream cars. While the rest of the world had moved on to front-wheel drive, Škoda was stuck with a design that was cheap to produce, but had, well, challenging handling characteristics, to put it politely. This is where the joke started. By the late 1980s, even the communist government in Czechoslovakia knew that something had to change. Years of underinvestment had left Škoda's cars hopelessly outdated. They needed a modern front-wheel drive hatchback to have any hope of competing or even just surviving. In a rare moment of forward thinking, they gave the engineers at Mladá Boleslav the go-ahead to develop a new car. And crucially, they allowed them to look to the west for help. This project would become the Škoda Favorite, and it was the car that saved the company. The development of the Favorite was a monumental undertaking. For the design, Škoda turned to the famous Italian design house Bertone, the same people who styled Lamborghinis and Alfa Romeos. For the engine technology, they consulted with Porsche. This was a radical departure from the insular approach of the past. The result, launched in 1987, was a revelation. It was a neat, practical and thoroughly contemporary-looking hatchback. It had the engine in the front, driving the front wheels, just like a proper modern car. Compared to the ancient rear-engined models it replaced, it was like a spaceship. The Favorite was more than just a new car. It was a symbol of hope and a statement of intent. Then, in 1989, everything changed. The Velvet Revolution swept through Czechoslovakia, peacefully dismantling the communist regime. The country opened up to the world, and so did its industries. For Škoda, this was the moment of truth. They had the Favorite, a decent modern car, but they were still a state-owned company in a struggling post-communist economy. With the Iron Curtain gone, Škoda was suddenly a very attractive proposition. Here was a company with a long history, a skilled workforce, a well-known brand name, even if it was for the wrong reasons, and a brand new modern car in the Favorite. They were a gateway to the untapped markets of Eastern Europe. A number of major global car manufacturers began circling, including Renault and BMW, but the most determined suitor was the German giant, Volkswagen Group. It was a tense courtship, a high-stakes game that would determine Škoda's entire future. Volkswagen saw the immense potential. The Czech government, for its part, was looking for a partner that wouldn't just swallow Škoda whole and turn it into a faceless factory churning out cheap VWs. They wanted a partner who would invest in the brand, respect its identity, and develop it into a proper player on the world stage. Volkswagen, led by the visionary chairman Ferdinand Piëch, made promises to do exactly that. The deal was officially signed in 1991. This wasn't just a takeover, it was a partnership. The Germans arrived in Mladá Boleslav, not as conquerors, but as collaborators. They brought with them investment, technology, and most importantly, their world-class manufacturing processes and quality control standards. The effect was immediate and transformative. The first car to be developed under Volkswagen ownership was the Felicia, launched in 1994. While it was essentially a heavily updated Favorite, it featured over 1,000 improvements. But the real game changer was the first-generation modern Octavia, launched in 1996. Based on the same platform as the VW Golf and the Audi A3, it was a Škoda through and through, huge, practical and brilliant value, but now with German levels of quality and technology. This was the car that announced to the world that Škoda was back. Today, Škoda is almost unrecognizable from the company that emerged from behind the Iron Curtain. It is a respected, profitable and truly global brand selling well over 1 million cars a year. From the Enyaq electric SUV to the sporty Octavia VRS, its range is as modern and desirable as any of its rivals. The factory in Mladá Boleslav, once a ruin, is now one of the most advanced car plants in the world. It's an incredible comeback story, a journey from a broken bicycle through wars and oppression to global triumph. It proves that with resilience, clever engineering and the right partner, you can turn a national joke into a source of immense national pride. This initial spark of genius set the stage for everything that followed, proving that you don't need a fancy bloodline, just a broken bicycle and a stubborn refusal to accept mediocrity.